Étant donné qu'on est en train de parler de la coopération, les partenariats Europe-Afrique, nous avons le DG d'Enabel, M. Jean Van Wetter, que je vais aussi appeler.
But first of all, thank you, Esther, for this great initiative, and thank you for the dynamism. I also like the name Global South Diplomacy in Business. I believe that the mix between diplomacy, private sector, and development is the way to go, and thank you for having so many people on a Friday afternoon. It's quite impressive. Ministre des Armes Flao, le président du Parlement bruxellois, l'ambassadeur auprès de l'Union européenne, Excellence, merci pour votre présence. Ça montre l'intérêt pour le sujet. Do I speak in English or French? Which one do you prefer?
Both.
Well, I will speak both. But thank you, and thank you for the European member of the European Parliament and former Minister for International Cooperation in Luxembourg. I like what you said, and I think we are at a key moment in the history of Europe and the relationship between Europe and Africa, because as you mentioned, the next multi-annual financial framework of the European Union has to be voted in the coming weeks, and there is a proposal for Global Europe which is strong but might not be voted, if I understand correctly. There is a lot of political parties against this important budget, and I think Europe would make a terrible mistake by reducing its external engagement with the rest of the world, and in particular with Africa. I think we live a paradoxal period where the need for international cooperation, partnerships has never been as high as it is now. You mentioned Ebola. This morning I had again a discussion on that. But other interdependencies have never been that high. And what we do is reducing our budgets for our investments, as you mentioned, for international cooperation, and we increase defense without really thinking on the consequences it can have. And I think it's important to have debates on that, and I think there is not enough, and that's why I like to come to those debates, because it's a trade-off. Do we invest in immediate threats, or do we invest in long-term preventions of potential threats, but also potential benefits? So Enabel, we have been advocating for a new model. I was 2 weeks ago in Paris at OECD for a conference on the future of international cooperation. This morning I was in Lugano, where there was the EDFI, European DFI, Development Finance Institution Summit, where it was also a discussion on the future. And we tried to promote a positive image of development cooperation. You said it, indeed, it has a negative image in the general public. People think that we spend public money without thinking and with no impact. So we need to be better to demonstrate the impact, and we need indeed to be better in showing that we can prepare investment possibilities for the private sector. You mentioned green hydrogen. I want to respond on you. I think green hydrogen is typically an area where it can be a true win-win. So indeed, if we go to Namibia and exploit the hydrogen only for the needs of the industry in Europe, that would be a mistake, because it would be an extractive policy or transactional policy as we had before. But in the case of Namibia, Namibia is interested in developing their own industry and needs know-how and transfer of technology. So I think if you do a partnership where you have this transfer of the technology, you have local production for the local use, and to develop local strategic corridors and local industry, and in the same time use part of the production for your own needs, there you start to have an equal partnership. So I'm a strong advocate for this type of partnership, where you see the benefits locally, but you also see the benefit for Europe. Because if you don't see the benefit for Europe, that's where you lose the political traction and where you lose the support of citizens. And for me, engaging with the private sector is not only helping private sector to develop new markets, but is also increasing the buy-in we have from European citizens, because most of them work for those private companies, and it's a way to have a narrative to make them understand what we do. Last week we had the General Assembly of the Practitioners Network, which is the network of all European development agencies, so GIZ, Enabel, Expertise France, Spanish agency, Italian agency. We have a group, and for the first time in our General Assembly we invited two large companies. One was Standard Chartered, the bank, at the senior level, C-level, and one was the CEO of DEME, which is a Belgian construction and dredging group. And the two of them said, we are keen to invest more in Africa. We don't need the money from development cooperation. What we need is an enabling environment, better regulations, better stability, better predictability of the markets, technical advice to make those markets more attractive to investors like us. So sometimes I hear people, Enabel, you are going to help the private sector. And no, we are not going to give money to the private sector they don't need, but we are going to work with our partners in different countries in Africa to make the environment more attractive, to attract large-scale private sector investment, and as you mentioned, make sure that it's inclusive. And we also invest in social security and redistribution mechanism, indeed, to avoid what happened in some other countries. So for me, it's not one or the other, or development cooperation on one side and private sector on the other, and financial flows between the two. It's more how you can work in parallel together with your partners in the different countries to make an enabling environment for private sector investment. And I can see it works. I can give you a lot of examples where we see more and more investment from European companies thanks to the enabling environment we created. An important element I want to add here, because we have ambassadors, I think African leaders have a big role to play. I was shocked 2 weeks ago. There was the Africa Forward Summit in Nairobi, organized by France and Kenya. And President Macron said, it's good you don't want development cooperation, speaking to African leader, it's good because we don't want it neither as a European. I think that's the dangerous language. I agree we need to have a new term, maybe not development cooperation, but we need a basic public investment. Private sector alone is not sufficient, especially in fragile context. So I like the concept. Sometimes some people say we want to remove ODA, official development assistance, or get rid of it. I think it would be a strategic mistake, and I like the concept of, instead of beyond ODA, it's called ODA and beyond. Saying you keep a basic of official development, public support between Europe and Africa, or within the UN system, and you make sure that you have a leverage effect involving non-usual suspects, new types of stakeholders, private sector, diaspora organizations, and others, to have a leverage, and indeed make sure that the figure you mentioned, I think is 195 billion per year ODA, it's not sufficient to meet the needs, but you have a leverage effect and you reach 20 billion. Last week we published a research on health. We see that investing 1% of GDP in health in Africa, 1% of the countries of African countries' GDP can generate 686 billion euro in return on investment for the next 20 years. So there is a return on investment, and we can materialize it. What we need to do now is better communicate. We have been, including myself and my organization, but in the past, in communicating on our results, we were mostly communicating on activities and on the what we were doing, but not enough on the impact. And I think if we do that, and if leaders in our partner countries are also saying that they appreciate this partnership, then we will manage to put back this international cooperation agenda high in the political agenda. But you are right, it's very low for the moment, and it's worrying that it's so low. So I want again thank the presence of the politicians in the room because their role is essential. Thank you.
Merci.
I spoke in English, I forgot to speak in French.
Yeah, so j'ai une deuxième et dernière question pour vous, Monsieur Van Wetter. Selon vous, quels sont les principaux leviers pour transformer les projets de développement en opportunités économiques concrètes pour les populations locales?
Mais je pense qu'il faut mieux les construire. En fait, c'est aussi peut-être quelque chose que je n'ai pas assez mentionné. Voilà, Président, je vous remercie de votre présence, Monsieur le Président. Merci pour le soutien que vous apportez à la coopération. Je pense que quelque chose qui doit changer, c'est le design des projets. Avant, on faisait des projets de développement en silo. Et donc, on travaillait principalement dans le secteur de l'éducation, de la santé et du développement rural. Et en fait, c'est comme s'il y avait dans le passé des projets de développement qui n'avaient rien à voir avec la société dans son ensemble. Et je pense que maintenant, quand on parle de coopération, moi je suis dans l'idée coopération Belgique-Côte d'Ivoire, par exemple, c'est qu'est-ce que la Côte d'Ivoire veut faire dans son développement industriel et en quoi la Belgique est bonne, en quoi on est bon la Belgique, l'industrie pharmaceutique, l'industrie portuaire, logistique, agroalimentaire. C'est 3 secteurs dans lesquels on est bon. Et donc, il faut qu'on partage ce know-how dans ces secteurs-là et qu'on n'aille pas dans des secteurs sur lesquels on n'a pas de valeur ajoutée. Si vous faites ça et que vous répondez vraiment aux priorités nationales et que vous inscrivez dans un plan national de développement, là, vous aurez des résultats et vous pourrez transformer votre projet de développement en une opportunité concrète d'investissement. Une autre chose qu'on a fait beaucoup plus, c'est parler au secteur privé. Je suis souvent étonné dans les forats sur le développement international. Tous les institutionnels sont là, les ambassades, mais très peu le secteur privé. Et ça, c'est aussi notre faute parce que les forats qu'on organise sont trop longs. Et du coup, les secteurs privés ne peuvent pas se permettre de venir 2 jours à un fora. Il faut faire des formats très courts, mais qui permettent d'écouter les besoins du secteur privé et de les mettre à la table. Et c'est ce qu'on a fait la semaine passée à Anvers, où on a fait pendant 1 heure écouter le directeur de Standard Chartered Bank et le directeur général de DME sur qu'est-ce qu'ils attendent d'acteurs comme nous pour les inciter à investir plus sur le continent africain.
Merci.
Merci.